All right, guys. So one thing, Kev, I need to cover ground. I want you to go at the end because I just,
Sure.
yeah, I just want to go through everything very quickly. So bottom line, how we ended off was there was a statement by Rava in connection with the Tanna Kamma that said, what combines two sets of witnesses or two individual witnesses that don't see each other is actually viewing the person that warns the murderer or the murderer viewing each of those witnesses separately. It's a factor that ties them together. And according to Rava, who was on this particular topic, he actually said that, what do you mean? Because the question arises that what do you mean that somebody that witnessed it is not the same person that gave the warning? How is that even possible? This is the whole discussion that goes about. And to give you paragraphs and paragraphs in one sentence,
Guys, can I
what,
show you
Yeah,
on
who
my
got a
phone?
warning?
oh, do you have to
Yeah, who
leave?
got a
So
warning?
when the siren comes, we'll go after. That's just a warning that the siren's going to sound in
It's 10
about six
minutes, yeah.
minutes. So
Hopefully it
Okay,
makes, I
let's
can
do
make
it
it
10
to my
minutes,
bike.
about 5 minutes, and we
I'm
have
on
to
a
go
bus
to the.
all
and
right.
I'm like 10 minutes
All
to
right, but then let's
stop.
do it. Let's not talk about it for 10 minutes because, like,
Yeah. And
please.
maybe I can join from the shelter. I'll just listen from the
Okay,
shelter.
but
How's that?
let's then go for 10
Okay.
minutes. And in fact, Kevin, then teach us and get it done with. Then I can do a one-on-one with you guys.
Okay. So I found halachas about war. Okay. So very topical. It says before a war, peace should be offered and war must be the last resort. And the source is in Devarim, uh, chapter 20, verse 10. And then it says another halacha is certain people are exempt. Like, for instance, a husband in his first year of marriage and a person that's, I think, planted a vineyard, doesn't say so here.
It's in Sota.
But say again.
It's in Sota. It's in Gemara Sota. It talks about.
Yeah. And then, but there's the exceptions where there are no exemptions. No exemptions. Oh, yes. Yeah. Vineyard exemptions, homeowner, vineyard person, fiance person, and a person who has too much fear because he'll, it won't be motivating for his fellow soldiers. Then, in a certain type of war, no one is exempt. Now, where did I have it here? So even a person who's standing under the chuppah, if a war breaks out, he has to actually go to the front. And do I have it here? No. So that's there's certain times where there are no exemptions. So certain times there are exemptions, certain times there aren't exemptions, and peace should be the first option. Okay.
Okay. Uh, Kev, on that, by the way, it's in Sota. It's from the 45th to the 49th daf. Gavin remembers this from Sota. You also know that the reason for the exemption, apart from having fear, that comes from the verse in Devarim chapter 20, verse 8. Because they're fearful because they committed a sin. In other words, you're impervious to getting killed if you're holding in a madrega where you didn't sin. So that fear comes from the fact that that's why it's brought up in Sota, that there's a suspicion that they're not entirely kosher. And then there's something called an optional war. So if it's taken on for political or strategic reasons, that's an exemption for certain individuals. A commanded war um, um, generally you're not exempt. That's to defend your own boundaries of self-defense. That everybody, all hands on deck. Okay. Um, from the Mishnah's perspective, obviously a man in the first year of marriage. And Gavin, you remembered we were learning about the Ola and the first fruits and when it's counted from. We discussed this
Yeah.
when we did um, from Rosh Hashanah, is it within the third year? We discussed this in Makkos and we brought it back to Sota. Do you remember? Gav?
Yeah, I remember it more from Makkos, but I do remember it. Yeah.
Okay, so I learned that with Rav Simcha in Mahasha. So, Kevin, well done. It's something that we need to know now. But you see, Kevin, that's why I know you're a better person than me because you would try a peaceful option and then do war. I would basically hand out pamphlets and say there's one region that's safe at section C, A, B, and D is not, and bring them all to section C and then flatten the place to the ground. I'd shake hands in terms of peace and say, don't worry, guys, nothing wrong, and I'd nuke the place. So I am not in power, thank goodness. So I would be the last one that should be in power. There'd be nothing left. But then you wouldn't lose individuals on a hand-to-hand combat, door-to-door
Yeah.
situation.
I'm
Okay,
going to join from my phone. Okay, Damon.
all right.
So let me just go off here and join
But
from the
technically, I
phone.
could never say these things in the beginning of a share. Because remember, we were landed up in the naughty
Yeah.
corner of YouTube. We were nearly barred. So you can't say anything about like, trans or gay or anything slightly off color. We have to wait a few minutes because nobody's going to give the share more than a few minutes if they're not from. Okay, Kevin's gone to
But
the
at least
shop.
now we can say what we want about Iran now. I'm pretty safe with that.
Yeah, Iran would be my term, so for sure, I wouldn't deal with it nicely. Um, okay,
There's the what's the name, by
Kevin's
the way.
joining.
Missiles are coming. Yeah. I just got a message like six,
Oh,
7 minutes ago. Just
do
could have
do
been
you
here.
have to, don't you
Sorry,
want to go
mate.
to the shelter?
Yeah, I'm going there now.
All right, so if you guys are on, you're on. Let me just cover ground, otherwise I'll cover you in a one-on-one.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate you teaching us while you're with us. All right, so Rava's other statement. How could you have a case, apart from the fact that a witness can be tied together even if they hadn't seen each other versus whether they were groups, two individuals, or two groups of two in a west and east wing? How can it be that the person issuing the hazra, the warning, could tie them in? Because they would view each group of witnesses or each individual witnesses, or vice versa. The witnesses can view the person that gave the hazra, the warning. So then the subject came up and said, well, how can the person that gives the warning not be witness to the crime? This is what Gavin Simpson was alluding to also, is that at what point of the crime do they have to see? The bullet leaving the gun, the bullet entering the body, trajectory, etc., predicted outcome within reasonability. The bottom line of it is that in many cases, the person issuing the warning can be the victim. He's not going to live to testify as a person of one of the witnesses, but he could have screamed, "Don't kill me. You'll be given the death sentence in return. It's not worth it. Even if you don't like me, think of them, think of yourself," that sort of thing. You get it. And when the Gemara uses this term, as I said yesterday, a demon, people like the Rambam don't obviously talk about these ethereal spiritual forces. You hear a voice and you warned. It's a logical thing. Their definition, there's two different definitions of a voice from a demon, meaning it could be literally some spiritual entity, but more realistically, a demon would be known as the murderer that says, I'm going to kill you. And I know I'm going to get killed for it, but you're worth it. Okay. So it could be that that person isn't holding it at a decent level. It's not even the victim. Or it could be what you call an indistinguishable voice, meaning you can't attribute it to have coming out of the mouth of a particular person because it might have been a crowded shuk or a marketplace, but certainly somebody issued a warning and said this is a punishment given by the Torah for a prohibited act. That's the bottom line. So then Rav Zutra brings this particular point and says, well, when we learn in the Pasuk, because he responded to Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman was saying that in monetary cases, it's effective that you can join two individual witnesses that never saw each other, because the Pasuk is, he shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness, which means we're dealing with a capital case, not a monetary case there. So as far as Rav Nachman is concerned, and he's just reiterating the Gemara, is that as far as monetary cases are concerned, even if the individual witnesses didn't see each other, you can combine them to form a testimony in order to get financial compensation. Now, Rav Zutra had an opinion to this, and that opinion is that, look, since this pasuk is there in order not to get two individuals to come together to testify against the defendant accused of murder, and it's in a case of leniency that this pasuk came about, then why can't we have a rule of almost a case of leniency if it was a capital case? And I'll give you an example. Is he's saying then maybe you don't apply this pasuk, and I've been thinking about it today, this evening when I was learning between Mincha and Mariv, is that pasuk he might not say does not apply to individuals, because Rav Zutra wouldn't want them to get together in order to, if they hadn't seen each other, to uh, um, almost convict the defendant. But what he might be saying is let's not apply that rule to groups. In other words, if you have two people in the East Wing and two people in the West Wing, and they got together, what that would mean if there's a bigger group is very simple, is that the bigger the number of people within a group, the more likely that you'd find a disqualified witness, not even a conspiring witness. And therefore, according to 5A, according to 5B, because 5A talks about having testified to a crime that you knew was committed, but you happen not to witness it yourself, and you're getting the Eidim Zomim punishment because you're testifying that you were there and you weren't, and therefore because you were quite capable, you and an individual, of having somebody killed, even though they're despicable and they created the murder. On that basis of convicting somebody when you were not there, it makes you liable to a reciprocal punishment. But 5B talks about another matter, and that is the disqualification of witnesses and a principle of Eidim Zomimim. And that principle goes the same way both ways, meaning if a witness is disqualified because there's a biases, in other words, they're a relative of one of the other witnesses. Up until then, we only thought if they were a witness of the plaintiff or the defendant, they would be disqualified. But we learned there that if they were a relative of one of the witnesses, they wouldn't be allowed to testify because there's a bias. Originally, what happened was we thought it was a bias just in favor of the fact that they were family and therefore they would want the defendant to get off the hook if he was innocent. But we say no, families are not always functional. Sometimes a family creates malice, and you'd want to testify as a family member against a fellow family member, especially if it's in a monetary case and you say, hey, my cousin's a no good person. In fact, there was a case recently in the community, and I'm not going to mention names, where a brother testified with a friend of mine against his brother because he said, listen, I grew up with the guy. The guy's a sociopath. He stole from me every member of the family because he's a heroin addict. Anything that he couldn't snort up his nose or inject in his veins, he'd sell to defray expenses. And therefore, I know this is reputation, so don't think it doesn't happen today. So the point of it is, Rav Zutra is saying, is forget about one-on-one. That's clear in the pasuk. Maybe if we have a group of two and two, East and West Wing, you don't have to have the sample size of saying that they didn't see each other. And therefore, according to Rava, that they joined by a person issuing the warning. It suffices that they join together to save the defendant. Because why are they saving the defendant? Because the more of them that get together, the more likely we'd find one of them disqualified, either because they're habitual sinners, they've got a track record, professional gambler, they're related to a witness, a plaintiff or defendant. Okay? Especially in a small town. Probably likely. Okay, so the Gemara says, listen, it's a good point, especially in relation to groups. Bit difficult with regards to an individual because the pasuk is clear. By the testimony of one witness shall a person not be executed. You can't kind of combine that with another witness and ignore that. But in terms of a group, you don't have to say they had to see each other. So the Gemara answers, listen, this is a very good point. Despite the fact that this is a good point, we're going to go with the halacha. And that is if they didn't see each other, they don't join, but the issue remains unresolved. And when it says in the particular Aramaic, there's two ways. If it says the issue is unresolved with a certain Aramaic terms, it means they can't get consensus. In another way, it says we go with the halacha, but it's a very, very good point, but we still go with the halacha. Okay, so that was a summary of yesterday to a T, despite the arguments. One other issue that was brought up was this issue of the barley treatment. So it's in Sanhedrin 81, and if you have a look at it, what they do is they starve this person to where his stomach shrinks. They stick him in a very small cage, very small, kind of has to crouch even. And then when his stomach shrunk, they make sure so that they starve him of water and they starve him of food. When the stomach shrunk, they then give him barley And obviously, I think they give him copious amounts of water. By that stage, he'll consume anything because in that stage, he'll even drink salt water. He goes shaboom, like that song in the 50s, and his stomach bursts. So, at the end of the day, that's an indirect method. It was applied, it seems, in two major cases. The one is when he endangers the entire society at large, meaning it's a serial murderer. And in a serial murderer case, you know that this person is dangerous to all. And that's the one where even Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva are particularly strict. They would apply the barley treatment by default when a person got off, but you know they're guilty, but they got off on a technicality like there was an irrelevant detail that the witnesses got wrong. And the Sanhedrin wanted to get the person off. But Rabbi Toffin and Rabbi Kiva were quite strict and said, no, when you know the person's guilty, but they get off on a technicality, you give them the barley treatment. Rabbi Gamliel was a little bit different. Mr. Simpson, are you with us, or you seem like you're on a WhatsApp somewhere else?
Taking notes.
Oh, okay. My heart is warmed all over because I know, like many times, if I think people are on the phone to their wives, you can't believe what we've seen. So I'm sorry, but I'm giving this. I'm watching all of you guys like hawks, and I'm giving it from memory. I should be reading and not like watching you guys. Apologies. Traumatic history. Um,
It's an
so.
amazing answer from Gavin Simpson. I'm going to use that one too.
Yeah, all of the guys have turned around and says, "No, listen, we were actually WhatsApping somebody, or we have somebody." Gavin Stoller's favorite thing is there's somebody delivering stuff from Take a Lot, which is true. You are important, or Lamaba is important, but they're going to deliver stuff like from Temu, and I have to get the stuff, So the order priority. But no, in seriousness, Gavin Stoller's main thing is he's getting medication, so that pekuach nefesh is worthwhile. So
No,
I'm so.
it's supplements. I don't
No,
take
no, no,
medication
Gav.
because
No, no,
it
I'm
doesn't look
not.
good.
This is
Supplements.
nobody's here to convict you.
Supplements.
I'm saying it's for health. So the fact that somebody's taking notes on the shear, I'm kind of impressed and awed. So bottom line is Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva are very strict, and the barley treatment under their watch was implemented much more often. Rabbi Gamliel was a very soft-hearted person, and he would get anybody off on a technicality. You're going to see in the Gemara, they're going to say once every 70 years, it's a bloody Sanhedrin. It's his statement, and it's got blood on their hands, etc. And he's a softie. What does that mean? If he could get anybody off on even an irrelevant technicality, he might have. But with Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Toffan, they nail somebody. Even if somebody partially watched a cohabitation, they'd be ready to enforce. So the barley treatment was, and by the way, the reason I'm mentioning Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Toffan is it's going to be mentioning it in the upcoming sugya, is they were around at the time where you could give Pesach, and they got their smicha from Eretz Israel, and they were capable of enforcing the death penalty. Okay? They were at that stage of level. But 40 years before the temple was destroyed, even they couldn't issue Pesach in terms of the death penalty because you could no longer enforce capital offenses. Just something you should note. These are issues not in the Gemara in Sanhedrin 81. You'll find all of this. So the bottom line of it, and why we're mentioning now, is this is in relation to yesterday to when it was applied. So generally, even more lenient opinions would apply when they were a habitual offender, like they were a serial killer, or they posed a danger to society where they were very dangerous. So you'd get them off on a technicality of that case, fine. But you couldn't release them to the public. These were the Ted Bundys of the world, you know. These are people that the society was not safe. Another reason that they would get that particular cases, we did mention that there were cases of teshuva processes where the Go'el Adam, the family, would tonk them maybe 2 years from now, and then they might recant in their teshuva and feel, well, this guy was no good. I killed him. I mean, look, he took my wife, took half my belong. So teshuva vacillates. We should say somebody makes a pure teshuva. It's not always the case. It's a case where people sometimes make a teshuva. Then afterwards it said, who could blame me? And then they say, no, it was wrong. Who could blame me? I'm not sure. This is normal process. Nobody always does a complete teshuvah. Or they do a complete teshuvah, but this person wasn't an angel, which is why the person wanted to stab them in the first place. I remember hearing quickly a podcast by Joe Rogan and Bull Burr. I think he's a comedian. Yeah, he said, "Listen, nobody ever asks why. It always is like, why did the husband hit the wife? It never came out of a vacuum. I'm not saying it's deserved, but I'm saying it never happened that a husband randomly got up and cracked his wife across the jaw. She had to have worn him out and continually nudged him. That was the only comment made. It's like it never happens where she's like they're getting along perfect and it happens. Just saying, I'm not advocating giving anybody a thrust, but it never happens in a vacuum. That's all I'm saying. And it never happens that somebody stabs somebody else in a vacuum. They had to have ticked them off. They might have slept with their wife. They might have owed them. I'm not saying it's allowed. I'm just saying it never happened in a vacuum, and therefore the teshuvah process is very complicated. Also, when the Sanhedrin would also give the barley treatment was when this person was uh, properly guilty. Everybody knew he was guilty, but on some little technicality, he would get off, and they weren't happy with the verdict. They weren't happy with it. So they knew this person needed the death penalty. All right. Can we go on to the new thing? Has this helped you in any way solidify yesterday? Because I put some effort into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you one question.
Sure.
I don't know if you'll know the answer, but would not giving a warning be considered a minor technicality, or is that a major one?
Well, major or minor gets the person off, and that's
No,
the
no. Would they get the body treat? I mean, for the body treatment. I'm talking about for the body treatment.
So there are different discussions. It is covered within the ChatGPT's chat I sent to you guys yesterday. You obviously haven't had a chance to look at it. There's a whole table, tick boxes, etc. You didn't look?
Oh, when
No,
I
no,
clicked on the link, it
I
just
haven't looked.
opened ChatGPT, the website. It didn't like show me the whole
Yeah,
conversation.
same over here. I had the same issue.
No, I'm sorry, guys. I've got it maybe in a security mode, in a high security mode, because I've got SARS tax issues. I've got personal health issues. And you never want somebody else's life. You think another person's life is plain sailing because they don't complain about it. But we all have the skeletons in the closet, even me. Okay, so maybe I did it where you could have accessed a million other chats that I had on the run from the law. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm just, I'm sorry about that, but I'll try and see if I can copy the text or get a history. It might open it up on my side. All right,
You
let's
have to
start
share
with
it and then make it public. It actually asks you. You got to actually share it, and then you got to actually make it public. It normally happens by default, but you must have missed that part.
All right, sorry. I'm not used to Gavin. Gavin is a book here on ChatGPT. I'm useless. All right. So Rav Yossi said, we're hitting something now, because Rav Yossi said in the Mishnah that no person can be executed unless both witnesses who testify against the defendant had warned him. So it makes it clear that Rav Yossi requires a warning as a formal precondition for issuing a death sentence. So this is one thing that you've got to bear in mind. If the only reason for the warning is to prove that the offender was aware that what he was doing was forbidden and liable to the death penalty, according to Rav Yossi, there'd be no reason to require a warning from both witnesses. So, according to Rav Yossi, he sees it as a biblically decreed prerequisite, an additional way to determine a way for the accused to get killed, because it would have to come from both witnesses. That's not the rabbinic way, because the rabbinic way serves two purposes. What's that purpose, according to the Tanakhama's opinion, is to, as Anthony Robbins talks about state management. If somebody's in the state to kill somebody, sometimes if you shake them and you say, stop, do you realize you will die? The victim might have slept with your wife or stolen all your funds, but it's not worth you dying. Let the two of them run away with each other. Good riddance to her. Good riddance. What do you need it for? What do you need the death penalty for? So it's to break somebody out of that cognitive state. That's one reason. The other reason is what you call um, how do you put it? Awareness. We're going to be learning in the second chapter about inadvertent killing. One of the subjects that are going to come up saying, I didn't know it wasn't allowed. And you turn around and say, what do you mean? You don't know it wasn't allowed that you couldn't kill somebody. There are people that might be ignorant, that might say, under these circumstances, I thought I'd do society a favor. So, in other words, there's genuine ignorance. So, some people or might be that ignorant. The other issue that's brought up, and we brought this up once again in the group, and I'm going to send a chat, is there's a discussion in Sanhedrin about what's considered hazroah, what's considered a warning. Do you have to know for what capital offense requires what death penalty warning? This is a big, big issue. There are two different opinions. The one is saying, a general saying that, listen, if you commit this particular crime, it's going to have this consequence and this death penalty, or does it suffice to say this will get any death penalty with regards to this crime? And specificity matters because they're looking to exonerate the defendant, some of the more lenient authorities. So I'll send you that chat. That was an issue that came about before. But Rav Yossi, who wants to make sure the defendant gets off, says it has to fulfill the entire context of the witnesses, that they have to be participating witnesses, and we learned this once before, and they have to say that they're going to testify as to the fact that they gave the hazroah, the warning. They're not just passive witnesses. Do you remember that was covered, guys, in 5b? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so that was Rav Yossi's opinion. There were different opinions. There was Rabbi Akiva, Rav Gamliel, and Rav Yossi, etc. So on that issue, Rav Papa questions Abaye, and he says, does Rav Yossi really subscribe to this view? Because are we not going to learn in the Mishnah in 9b that Rav Yossi says an enemy is executed for killing his foe, even if he was not warned prior to the killing? He cannot claim as a defense that the killing was an accident because he's considered alerted and forewarned. Since it was known that he hated his victim, it can be assumed that he killed him deliberately. So we see that Rav Yossi doesn't seem to require a warning. Okay? He doesn't require this as a formal precondition for a death sentence wherever the tragedy might look like an accident, because the transgressor's intent is clear. Sorry, my blood sugar's starting to get low. The guys know, Gavin Simpson doesn't know, and Aidan, that when my blood sugar gets low, I start to slur my words. Apologies. So Abaya says to Rav Papa, look, we're talking about two different Yossis here. In that Mishnah, it's known as Rav Yossi bar Yehuda, and not generally the Tana referred to as Rav Yossi, which is Rav Yossi bar Chalafta. Because how do we know that? We learned in the Brisa, Rav Yossi bar Yehuda says a scholar does not require a warning. Because if somebody is learned, they can be distinguished between an unintentional offender and a deliberate one based on their knowledge. So the same thing with you talking about a accidental murderer where they're busy tiling their roof tiles and the enemy walks past. Its enemy is somebody that within 3 days there's been enmity with. They haven't been on speaking terms and they were close buddies. If a brick suddenly lands on this person's head, it's no accident, believe me. There's issues. They haven't sorted it out. But that Rav Yossi bar Yehuda is different to the Rav Yossi we usually know and refer to, which is Rav Yossi bar Chalafta. So Rav Yossi bar Chalafta is basically saying, no, we need those two people that witnessed it to also say they're going to participate in the case, and they've given the formal warning. Okay, and then we're gonna finish off. We've got 8 minutes, and we're gonna be very quick. Say, listen, another teaching by the testimony of two witnesses in the Mishnah that the Sanhedrin should not listen through an interpreter. Okay, Remember, it says that they have to hear the witnesses directly. Why not through an interpreter? Because things can be misinterpreted. When it's a death penalty case, you don't want somebody dying on the fact of misrepresentation or the fact that maybe the interpreter's got it in for the defendant. He owes him money, maybe. Who knows? So it was a case that came before Rava in a court proceeding, and Rava appointed an interpreter to serve between them. And the Gemara asked
Kevin asked, sorry to interrupt. Kevin asked if you can let him in. He got kicked out. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry
Hang
to
on.
interrupt.
Apologies, Kev. Let me just. Kev? Kev, how's it?
Oh, okay, as you were.
All right, thank you. I feel like
Welcome
I've been
back.
Arthur left Arthur had to probably get out of the bus and find
Yeah.
shelter. That's
No,
why
I get that completely. Kevin, I could always fill you in on whatever you missed, but the bottom line is this case of the Gemara that you cannot, in the Mishnah, it says you can't judge a capital case where the witnesses, the plaintiff or the defendant needs an interpreter because it's going to affect the translation, and therefore we might put an innocent person to death. So we want to know why there was a particular case in the Gemara that Rava had an interpreter to serve between them. How could he do this? Because it's contrary to our Mishnah. So the Gemara answers Rava was able to understand their language and therefore there wasn't any misrepresentation. But he was a little bit embarrassed about his inability to reply with language fluency because the grammar might have not been understood by their side and therefore required an interpreter. But as long as the Sanhedrin or as long as the judge could understand what they were saying, that's fine. But if they couldn't interpret back with the correct sort of diction, in that particular case, an interpreter could be used as long as the defendant, the plaintiff, or the witnesses didn't misalign. We're just finishing off on this note, and we in.
So-
Just let me finish. We're just finishing off. We're on page 7A1. And there's a question here with regards to the grounds of kinship. What we mean is a bias by a relative. So Eliah and Tuvia were relatives of co-signers to a loan. Okay? And they were also witnesses to a loan. So when litigation regarding that loan came up before the court, Rav Papa thought to say that they're eligible to testify about the loan because they're not related to the lender or the borrower in any way because or the principles of the case, and the position is rejected. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, said to Rav Papa, the borrower will not have money to pay the debt. And who's the lender going to go after? The co-signers of the loan. And since the co-signers of the loan could now suffer vulnerability and then become the principals in the case, any relative that's connected to the co-signer of the loan cannot testify against it because they're going to want to protect the co-signer of the loan or convict the co-signer of the loan because they've got enmity. And either way, if there's something down the line that's going to affect not just the plaintiff or the defendant, but the co-signers, their witnesses are not going to be allowed to testify either. Okay, does that make sense, Kevin? Just give me a second before we interject. Does that make sense, guys? Quickly.
yeah,
Guys?
it's a conflict of interest and
Yeah, but we're saying it actually dictates even the co-signers of a loan that are not they're not the two parties they're not the debtor and creditor. They're just co-signers to the loan. If anything goes awry, they're going to be affected, and therefore witnesses that are related to co-signers are not allowed, either because they would go in favor of the co-signers or against them. And therefore they're also prejudiced, even though it's a ramification that could occur later on. Everybody understand that? Yes, no? Thumbs up, quickly?
Yeah.
All right, good.
Thumbs up.
Kevin, what was your question you were going to interrupt me on? While I was in the middle
we were
of
talking about. So someone said something.
No, you said something while I was
You were talking as part I missed was the part I missed was about what was it again? Oh, I had a question. Sorry, my mind's
I'm not sure. When you think about it, you can add the question
you
to the group.
you said it to me. Jeez, I've forgotten already, man. Hold on. Other odds in there.
People speaking a foreign language.
Yes, so that if it's people speaking a foreign language, maybe the interpreter will give it across. He won't
Correct.
give
He
it
might
across in
give
an
it
accurate
across in
way,
a
and he'll change
slanted way.
the
He doesn't
meaning.
necessarily have to have a motive. He could just be shocking as an interpreter. So as long as the judges understand the language, and that was one of the inductions about being a judge, is they needed to understand the languages of the day. Your Aramaic, your Latin, your Hebrew, your Greek, the common languages, nothing too foreign. But that was one of the admissions about being a judge. That's how bright the Sanhedrin had to be. You're completely correct. So we're talking about here an obscure language, but at least in this case, it was understood. It just he just wasn't able to give it back with the right amount of grammar. That's why Rava was able to be get an interpreter. So only that he could communicate back way in the right manner, but he understood everything. He understood everything. So then it wasn't prohibited. He didn't need an interpreter for that. All right, guys. I hope today was productive. I put in a bit of work, doing a lot of research.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope it amused you, helped you.
Awesome.
That's
Yeah,
great.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah,
All
well
right,
done.
guys. Lovely to see you as always. Be well. Cheers.
Thank you.
Yes.